Hey guys, tonight I want to talk to you about what's wrong with the Kiruv movement. Have you ever asked yourself, why is the Kiruv movement less than 100 years old? Why didn't our sages of old feel an obligation to irreligious Jews to try to make them more religious? I mean, didn't they see buildings collapsing and plagues occurring around them on a daily basis? Why didn't they come to the conclusion that it must be that God is angry at secular Jews, that it must be because of the lack of teshuvah? I mean, this is a real question, because this is exactly what the Kiruv cult tells you on a daily basis. Now, what's really different today? Look, Jews have been assimilating since Israel received the Torah. How did this now become an existential threat in the Jewish world, as many of these online rabbis claim, that the God of Torah has a bullseye, not just on secular Jews, but especially the religious, and on their surrounding neighbors for ethnic Jews failing to come back to Torah? And the answer is easy. It's because the God of Torah is not a bully. He doesn't force anyone to do any form of teshuvah, because then it wouldn't be sincere teshuvah. Isn't that obvious? Because if the alternative, as these rabbis teach, is God creating COVID-19 to kill millions and burying people alive in rubble, then it surely cannot be a choice. I mean, the idea that we actually have a choice has been the traditional Torah approach, even in the Haredi world. But the truth is that it was mainly Kabbalistic movements like Chabad who started teaching this notion that if we don't reach out to secular Jews, God will kill us both. And spun together within a messianic narrative that the Messiah is essentially here, this animated them to start what they call shlichut and what others call kiruv. Now, let's take a few steps back to see how teshuvah and even Musar was taught before it was hijacked by these individuals. Look, friends, from a Torah perspective, tshuva or teshuvah in galut is realigning your behavior to resemble what was outlined in the Torah that you initially agreed to keep. And again, this, from a Torah perspective, is only relevant when it's done in the collective. By what? By Jews who are already religious, not secular Jews. And yes, it's pretty unanimous by virtually all halachic sources that irreligious Jews were never really considered Israel. Again, till the Kabbalistic world came up with the notion that God judges you not by your actions, but by the special soul that's within you, what Kabbalah calls the Jewish soul, which is again not an idea found in either the Torah nor Mishnaic sources. Because teshuvah, from a Torah perspective, was not meant for people who fight against God or for those who do not identify with the initial covenant, but for people who do identify and just need a nudge in the right direction. Now, I know that this sounds completely foreign to many of you because you've been indoctrinated with all this online content. But this is why no one did Kiruv 100 years ago, because they didn't view irreligious Jews as actually part of Israel. I.e., they wouldn't think that God would punish them or their neighbors by collapsing buildings on them because someone who may have had Jewish blood just didn't want to keep Torah. And if you think that God is targeting people for death because they don't want to become observant, Orthodox Jews, then you cannot honestly claim to worship an ethical God, because then it's not a choice if the alternative is death. And not just your death, but the death of your children. And you will say, Asher, how about the tochacha or the klalot, the curses found in the Torah? Sure, friends, that was part of the covenant that Israel accepted in the Torah. This means that the curses were put in place for all those contemplating and acting incorrectly into the land they were about to enter, that they should know better, that if they were not willing to pay that price, those consequences for behaving in such a manner in God's land, it's better that they didn't join the covenant or they didn't make a covenant to keep the Torah. and ultimately not enter the land to begin with. And this is why it was ultimately a choice. And those curses were only meted out via the exilic process. That means in the process of being exiled or occupied, and not that God was there really to curse their whole line forever, right? Or do you think, Midrashim aside, that God actually forced Israel to accept the Torah? Which is why this notion that God cares who your mother happens to be, or on whether he will punish you for breaking Torah, is completely ethically illogical. Because everyone, either born or not born into a religious family, has to come to a point in their life where they either choose to follow and identify with Israel and the covenant or not. That means there is no coercion. No one can make that decision for you. And if you feel that you're not up to the task, then opt out. Let God judge you as he would judge any Gentile. And yes, he does punish unethical behavior, just like we saw with Sodom and Gomorrah and Nineveh. Yes, God does not tolerate immoral behavior from anyone. However, the precepts that are unique to the Torah, he only holds those who have accepted it explicitly accountable. And where do we see this in Torah or Talmudic history? Well, the answer is, where do we see Jews not identifying with Torah or the covenant in Torah or Talmudic history? Again, not because it didn't happen, but because when someone chose to exit the nation religiously, he or she was not still considered part of that nation. Because if that was the case, there would never have been any hope for Israel. Heck, the vast majority of Jews actually remained in Bavel. They chose to assimilate, but we don't then see Ezra crying out for those left behind, because now the Jewish people who did identify with the Torah nation were going to be held accountable. But that is exactly what is taught today. So why keep Torah today, and why align yourself with the covenant? Friends, it's only to label ourselves ready to return to the Holy Land in a redemptive manner. And if you don't want to remake that covenant, that agreement to keep his Torah again, then stop identifying yourself as Israel, and you will not be considered Israel. There's no coercion at all. You are free to leave, because if you stay, it has to be a choice fully based on love, and it cannot in any way be based on fear and still be considered a choice. Heck, we tell non-Jews all the time that being Jewish is not for everyone, because it's not, even if you happen to have Jewish ancestors. So just as the first covenant was a choice, so will the future one also be a choice, because the covenant is not the Torah, but the agreement to keep the Torah that God remakes. Right? He remakes the covenant every time Israel is about to be redeemed. And what is that agreement essentially? Easy: to keep these laws in the land and not in Galut. Again, we keep them now because we want to be counted as part of the redeemed. Not that there are actual consequences for not keeping these hukim. So essentially, the Kiruv movement, as it is practiced today, is foreign to the Torah's notion of sin, exile, and redemption. And it's that simple. Thanks.